Hello Internet, it's time for another Wednesday serial. This time, I'm trying to Q some A's, and I'd like to Q your A if you have a Q. Yeah, so in the future, questions below, and I'll answer them. If enough come in, I'll try to make a regular thing, that sort of deal. But I kind of put this up on Twitter, and I got a few questions, so I'm just gonna dive into it and try to go through them one by one. So first up is Sleepy Reader, and he has a few questions. The first is DC versus Marvel. I tend to be more Marvel affiliated, I guess. Generally prefer Marvel, especially for a lot of the older stuff. I like the characters, and you go back, I really like the X stuff in the 90s. I mean, I'm going through some X Factor right now, and I'm really liking that, and I like the breadth of what they do overall more. But DC right now, for what's coming out, I think is better. Marvel's too event-centric and too low with the text, whereas DC's willing to put out something like Talon, which is written more like the comics that I tend to gravitate towards, I'm finding, with a little more exposition, willing to just have a diatribe of text against what I think some now consider to be against what comics should look like. And I'm actually appreciating sitting there and digging into a comic a little bit more. I'm going off and on some titles, but right now I feel like the best comics always tend to be the B-list stuff. You're always going to have your Batmans and your Spider-Mans and stuff, but what's really cool is when you find like a Slingers or a Cable and Deadpool, or like Nightwing in the 90s or something like that. Those tend to be the stuff that I really like a lot more. And so, yeah, that's kind of indecisive, but I mean, I love the superhero stuff, and how can, with, you know, a combined amount of 100 years of comics, I mean, how do you really pick between the two? I don't know. Really, Marvel wins because it has Deadpool. And then Image versus Dark Horse, he asks. Image. Every time, Image. Dark Horse, the only thing I really like from Dark Horse for a while was the Buffy stuff, which I have affiliation to now, and Image is trying new comics. They're putting out Saga. They have, you know, Fear Agent under them. Like, they're everything, and they're kind of slowly becoming where all the stuff that would have been published under Vertigo would go, which is all basically the greatest stuff in comics overall, is now directing itself towards Image. And Image is frankly probably my favorite overall publisher right now, because they're actually just publishing comics and crazy cool things and stuff I don't like, stuff other people would like, and it's what the industry needs. And even when they publish something I don't like, I love them for doing it. So yeah. Then he asks Mylar. I bag and board most of my stuff. I'm starting to get to the point where I don't bag and board every comic, I know, but when I start buying them at about, I've gotten a few hauls now of like 100 comics at a time or whatever, and it's like some old X Factor. I'm like, do I really want to go and bag and board all this? Like, I'm gonna read it once, maybe twice. It's gonna be piled in with a lot of stuff. It takes up more space if it's bag and boarded, and if I just keep it in a box most of the time, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like a big deal. So I'm trying to maybe, you know, slowly bag and board everything again, but I'm trying to work through. I'm also trying to find a way to shove off some of my collection. I tried some eBay stuff and it went horribly, so it's a balance. And then, how do I feel about variant covers? I don't care. I actually, most things with variant covers I don't like. The idea that people would pay $15 or whatever for a special amount of an issue, okay, whatever. If that's what you like, that's what you like. I don't care. That's for other people. I don't get it. I came really close to buying one because there's this X-Men variant cover that was Deadpool with 53 different birds pooping on him. And it's this really like weird dig at DC, and it's a great cover, and I hate the fact that it's a variant cover. I feel that like if they had a Deadpool issue with that cover, that cover alone would have sold issues, brought some people to Deadpool that might have not tried it, especially in the middle of an arc, and really, you know, that's such an amazing cover, and to malign it by being this $10 variant for an X-Men cover is just so... Oh, that cover could have sold comics. Anyways, most of the time I don't really get it. Then there's the issue with, like, X-Men #1, where when I was but a young boy and figuring out all this, because when I was growing up I didn't really have friends, I didn't really have a basis, the internet wasn't... It's probably kind of there, but I didn't have access to it. And a lot of what I learned about the industry in terms, like, it took me forever to try to figure out the difference between a trade paperback and a graphic novel was, and now I realize it's kind of a gray definition, but now I know. But back then I'd hear these terms and issues and runs, and it was all, you know, I was a kid diving in the 90s with no frame of reference, so I was trying to figure it out, and, you know, I figured a different cover meant a different comic. And so that's how I learned the hard way at, like, you know, $2 for the issue back when this comic was worth something. Now if you want a copy of X-Men 1, someone will slap you with it. It sucked because I had to learn, like, and it forced me to research and learn more about the industry, which is probably overall a good thing. But back then, you know, any comic I had, I read like 5 times. So, you know, in a matter of a year, and then again and again and again. That was when I was sick. I could read my entire comic collection in a day. Now, not so much. So, yeah, I don't like variant covers. I think it's bad, and right now there's certain ways that it kind of hurts the industry, and it sucks. Then there were a couple questions from DaCosta DC. He asked me why I pretend not to pick up SpiderMan. I don't. Sleepy Reader hit me with the first 2 issues with digital codes because he's... I don't know. Normally I'd say he's nice, but that's nice with a little bit of mean mix. I don't know. It was very kind of him to give me the codes, and I was too morbidly curious not to read it, and now I really can for sure say I don't like it. Yeah. But I'm not picking that up, not till... I honestly don't think I could pick up Amazing Spider-Man again until there's a new author on it at this point. Then he asked, who is Miles Morales in, you know, the 616 universe? I think they did a couple of weird shots right before Spider-Man died as kind of a red herring as to that sort of deal. Honestly, I don't know what it is. There's no real connection, but when people talk about Miles Morales and kind of where she is, Peter Parker used to have a neighbor when he was living with Mary Jane alone in kind of just a house. And his neighbor was Hope, and she was deaf. And so they had some stories with her, and it was kind of much more human interest sort of stuff, and kind of tied Spider-Man to something again in the 90s, and it wasn't quite the whole drug dealing things of the 80s or the social events of then, but it was a way for them to try to do some stuff. And it was more 90s centric, because I mean, yeah, drugs were a thing or whatever, but there's a lot more coming up of, like, you know, race for the cure, dealing with people who had these ailments and trying to deal with that and help them along the way and be a good person. And that was kind of Spider-Man's entry into that, but I think it was only ever played in oh my gosh, which one? The Sensational Spider-Man, which is probably the shortest run ongoing Spider-Man comic. That was just supposed to be a normal month-to-month deal. Yeah, so I say Hope. I don't know why. I don't know why those characters are connected to my mind, but they are. So there you go. And then his other question was not a question. So there you go. And then Phil M. Knight from nowhere, oh my gosh, asked me this amazing question. Were comics destined to be darker and more sexually suggestive? Just, kind of that coming in of the 80s, most notably 86. Or did more Alan Moore and Miller, I'm assuming, Frank Miller, pave the way? And great question. Personally, I feel there's no real way to prove it. I don't think, but I'm going to try. Certainly where comics did end up going was influenced probably more so by Alan Moore than Frank Miller, but a lot of stylistic stuff and like the 90s Image stuff feels more bad derivative of that sort of Frank Miller stuff. And when you look at the worst kind of stuff to come out of The Dark Knight Returns and all that, it feels like those bad 90 like Youngblood sort of comic things. And I feel that's very true when you look at The Dark Knight Strikes Again. Like, if Batman was written in the 90s at Image, that would have been the comic in my mind. That or All-Star Batman, that sort of deal. But there were signs that comics were going to be taking on more serious tones, relationships were becoming a bigger deal, and the level of violence needed to kind of change. That precedes 86 with Watchmen, Dark Knight, Mouse, and all that, partially because comics, the whole idea of what comics were, was changing. Of course, when comics were originally sold, we think of it now, but there weren't comic stores. They were just things sold on a stand. And I can almost relate to this because when I was getting into comics, they were sold in the grocery stores, and that's how I kind of started. But I was able to go to a comic shop once I was interested and want to check out stuff that I couldn't find there. But it used to be, if you couldn't find it at the store, you couldn't find it. And then eventually there was some back order catalog sort of deals that started popping up, and ordering through a few various means. I don't know all of them, but some things I think kind of tried and failed and evolved very quickly, or quickly for the times. And then the stores came up, and that became a bigger deal, and then your whole hunting for comics came about, and it wasn't necessarily just flea markets anymore if you're lucky enough to try to get a back issue there. But because of all that, comics were kind of seen as their own thing and not just these weird funny books, collections of stories, whatever. And so that evolved for years and years and years. Wow, a lot of history. Characters, whatever. This is great history, right? And then you see eventually the code that was imposed on them starting to slip away. SpiderMan has these stories dealing with drugs in the best way possible, and it sells a lot and made a big splash. Nearly every time I hear about a comic creator that started in the 90s, they reference the point that their parents bought them the Spider-Man issue dealing with drugs, and it started a whole nother addiction. It's like nearly every creator from the 90s has had that moment, it sounds like. And so from there, the code started slipping away, which meant that now suddenly they could talk about drug dealers and talk about a certain level of violence, potentially a corrupt cop, but only initially when it's framed in a certain way. Then you start playing it, and then you can start playing in the vigilante angle and not just looking at them almost as like deputies of the state or something. You get to actually play with the complexity of the idea of the character, their own brand of justice. Batman's allowed to become darker again for that. And then before you have Miller, before Miller did most of what he's known for, it was Daredevil, which is all his best stuff, probably because he's reined in by an editor who's like, no, stop being crazy for a second and come back to the story. Oh, okay, we're good. And you see you see that change there, and how, because they're allowed to do some things that they weren't before, which were perfectly fine in storytelling, it wasn't going to really offend anyone anymore. They were able to tell these stories, and it just started shifting, and they were part of it. I mean, 86, those creations were known, and those two men led the charge, but so many other creators were doing so many similar things, like right after, right before, and they had to have those ideas in their head beforehand, and sometimes it was just a matter of editorial being like, well, it's a good idea, but we don't know if we're ready for that. I imagine it's a lot of that, and suddenly, once it's okay to go a little darker with stories that were great enough for them to try to push the envelope, because they knew they were going to kind of sell on the merit of, these are great comics, and so we can kind of try this here and there. And then you get Green Arrow Longbow Hunters, which sends Green Arrow on a completely different path from any superhero, and you get some terrible things happening to Black Canary in there. You have Spider-Man going, and actually purposely for a while being a bit more socially relevant, even when it gets zanier and does all that. Very importantly, you have X-Men. I mean, you think about where X-Men went with Claremont's run, and some of that's later, but that's also considered, you know, the high superhero stuff. But I mean, just the relations, and yeah, it's some sexual innuendo and stuff, not too bad. I mean, certainly kids are fine to read it, but you didn't have those kind of relations before, and you certainly didn't have big characters talk about potentially breaking up or anything like that. And you know, just the race coming and all that, not just having these prototypical characters, but allowing more black characters to come in, allowing more females to come in, doing all that. I mean, we forget, but that's part of the reason why the industry has so many, you know, white male characters, is because everybody wants the classics. The classics were all white guys at the time, because that's all that I mean, even then, like, them being a little bizarre or whatever, guys running around in tights, was about what they could get away with some of the time. Sometimes it was just the times, frankly. And so, but people still want Barry Allen. They don't want a different kind of Flash, though I guess all the Flashes are white. But, like, you can't have the black Green Lantern come through, or the Mexican one be the main one. It has to be Hal Jordan. That sort of deal. And so that diversity, and then those racial tensions kind of got to finally come to a head too as we were moving forward. Sorry, I kind of spiraled out there, but I do feel, again, Alan Moore and Frank Miller were two big names that really pushed this big change in comics, but that change was coming with or without them. I don't think it would have been as successful without them, and we certainly wouldn't have some seminal works of all time without them, but I feel like something was shifting at the time, and there was something in the air clearly around 86 that comics were just going to be changing, and we were lucky to get the good works to go with that. And so it could have been a lot less impressive, but it would have happened. So that's my thought there, rambly as it was. So yeah, I hope you guys liked this video. I don't know, trying out something new, and certainly didn't expect such a question right off the bat, but it was awesome. And yeah, if you guys have any more questions, I will try to let you know what I think about them. Certainly it's all what comes out of here. So yeah, peace, and catch you soon with some